Okay, over to you, Ben.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ben Mcnally, and I am the driving force behind Ben Mcnally Books, which up until the summertime was on Bay Street in Toronto and has since moved to temporary lodgings on Adelaide Street East as we await some sort of semblance of normality in the real estate market. We like our new space really a lot, and we are there committed until January at the very least. And we are actually operating to some extent as a real bookstore, but mostly we're doing shipping out and curbside pickup and people dropping in and things like that. And the way the bookstore is laid out allows us to actually have a book shopping by appointment, and we've had a reasonable amount of success with that. We remain extremely cautious. Downtown Toronto is not necessarily a really safe space. So again, our commitment is to maintaining the safety and comfort of our staff and customers, and we'll see how this plays out. It's certainly been interesting times from a bookseller standpoint and from a publishing standpoint. So I'm very grateful to be able to be part of this tonight. I've been friends and business associations with Marc for a very long time, and it's been a most satisfying relationship from my point of view. I will remind you that we have the books at our store, and Peter will be coming by the store tomorrow afternoon around 3 o'clock to sign the copies that we have. If you want a personalized copy, like if you want them to put less than one sentence and your name in the title page of the book, send us an email at info@benmcnallybooks.com before 3 o'clock tomorrow, and we can make that happen. And the book costs $24.95, and shipping, depending on where you are, is usually between $8 and $15, unless you live in rural Newfoundland or Haida Gwaii or someplace like that. Tonight's event will consist of a conversation between Peter Unwin and his editor and publisher, Marc Côté. The conversation will last approximately 30 minutes and be followed by questions that can be submitted by you through chat box. I will say that I really enjoy this. I've known Peter for a while, and we've promoted his books in the past. So you'll find out about Peter from Marc, but let me tell you a little bit about Marc. He's been the publisher of Cormorant books for 20 years, working with writers and poets from across Canada. Prior to that, he was a bookseller, a book reviewer. He was director of the Literary Press Group. He was marketing manager of Stoddart Publishing, has had a most successful stint at the Canada Council, where he was senior officer in charge of awards and prizes, coordinating the marketing of the Governor General's Literary Awards in 1996. Cormorant Books has been nominated as the Small Press Publisher of the Year by the Canadian Booksellers Association 7 times, and winning 3. Marc himself has been Editor of the Year twice. But most importantly, Marc is a great friend and promoter, not to just writers, but to booksellers as well. And that means really a lot to me. He's been a great friend of all of us, and it gives me great pleasure to send this over to you. Marc?
Thank you, Ben. In ordinary times, this is the part of the book launch where I speak very highly of Ben Mcnally Books. And I usually point to the beautiful, beautiful surroundings that Ben provides for book launches. Unfortunately, I can't do that right now, but I can remind everybody of that glorious temple to literacy and culture that Ben had and will again have. And also what makes that temple more important is Ben works with his staff very hard to ensure that there are always excellent books on his shelves. And it's one of the most wonderful ways to pass any time at all is to go through the shelves at Ben Mcnally Books. You will find yourself having relieved yourself of far more money than you should. Now, I get to introduce Peter Unwin. And I have known Peter Unwin for a gobsmacking 25 years. I realized that the other day. His very first book was published by Cormorant Books before I became the publisher, when Jan Geddes was the publisher. The Rock Farmers was a collection of short stories, and it was nominated for the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medallion. It didn't win, but it's still a very prestigious list to get on. Peter's second book was a novel, 9 Bells for a Man, which is where I got to work very, very, very closely with him. And working with him, I discovered somebody who has both a dedication and a passion for the history and the geography of this country. And I'm going to say it is unparalleled. And I truly mean that. Reading the manuscript for 9 Bells for a Man and then working on the book with Peter, I learned more about Ontario, small part of Ontario, in that period than I did in all of high school and university. And it's a ripping good novel to boot. Since then, he's gone on to publish the nonfiction books, Hard Surface, In Search of the Canadian Road, and The Wolf's Head, Writing Lake Superior. He has also published another collection of short stories, Life Without Death, which was nominated for the Trillium Prize, and a book of poetry, which Cormorant also published, When We Were Old, which was a finalist for the Relit Award. Peter is about to defend his doctoral dissertation on the changing status of the book in the digital world, a phenomenon better known as the death of the book. He is also a candidate in a second doctoral program in English literature. He lives in Toronto with his wife and 2 daughters. I guess when you get your second doctorate, we're going to have to refer to you as Dr. Unwin. That's what they would do in Germany, I believe.
Doctor squared.
Doctor squared. Okay, over to you, Peter. You have a few words to say?
More than a few. First, I want to thank you all for coming. Of course, it's hard to believe that you're actually out there, but I see a number that indicates that you are. So hello, and thank you for coming to your desks and computers tonight. I really appreciate it. My first thought was, oh, it's raining, nobody's going to come. But then I realized I didn't have to worry about that. So it occurs to me that if a book is anything, it's basically a technology for making community. And this book launch is also, in its strange way, and new and historic way, a way of establishing community. You are that community. By coming here, you have made it. Thank you very much. It's an honor. And I want to start with some thanks because you have to do this. This is the right thing to do. I want to thank my partner, Deborah, my partner of many years, for unwavering support. I want to thank my daughters, Dorothy and Alicia, for their patience and for their tolerance, but in particular for their tolerance. I'm delighted to thank Marc Côté of Cormorant Books for his long-standing and his absolute commitment to this manuscript and now this book. This project was many years in the making, and Marc was crucial to it as an editor, as a publisher, as a friend, peer, and a colleague. I want to thank quickly all the staff at Cormorant Books. Warm shout out to Sarah Cooper, in particular for her down-home Canadian warmth, her hospitality and her acumen, and for hard work. Chantel Cho is at the machines, at the controls of this whole thing, and she's crucial, and thank you very much. I know that all our fingers are crossed because this, as I say, is a sort of historic and new thing to do. I want to thank Ben, of course, and Ben Mcnally Books. And finally, I want to thank Angel Guerra for the cover art. Now, if I can't imagine a book that visualized what I intended a cover more accurately than he does. And when I'm asked what is written in stone about, I think I could safely just say, well, look at the cover. And I'm not sure that I've ever been able to say that before through many books. So that's, I hope I haven't left anybody out, and thank you very much. Oh, Marc, I did want to thank you in particular because Marc does something very special. I give Marc something like this. And Marc gives me back something like that. So I really appreciate that, and thank you very much.
Well, let's hope our little trick worked. We didn't practice it quite enough, but I hope you got the idea from manuscript to finished book. We have a handful of questions, and we're going to start with a softball question to you, Peter. No curve, no spitball, nothing fast. Why is the title of the book written in stone and not carved in stone?
Well, I have no idea. No, there's a good reason. You know, the term written in stone is often, it's employed as a negative. We say it's not written in stone. We say, oh, well, that's not written in stone. Just because they say that, it's not written in stone. This book, in fact, is written in stone. It is largely, it concerns pictographs, of which there are thousands and thousands across the Canadian Shield in particular. And it concerns one man's attempt to comprehend these pictographs. The most famous, for example, Agua Rock on Lake Superior, Mazenau Rock, these are now tourist sites. People go to visit them. We don't know what they mean. They are, they exist in the distant past. They last for hundreds and perhaps thousands of years. They are, in my mind, native technology, and they represent Canada's first novel. I think it's safe to say. I find these, I find all of these to be remarkable paintings, largely because the ink, or rather the paint themselves, has never been able to be duplicated by science. They're made of ochre, which is mined around the North Shore of Lake Superior. It is heated, mixed with the oil that is from the bladder of a sturgeon, which may account for some of the reason that the sturgeon is represented so predominantly in much indigenous literature, thinking, and mythology. And what I find fascinating is that we simply can't do it. No modern paint has been able to duplicate what they do, which is simply sit on rock faces on some of the most exposed surfaces on Earth and last for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And as I say, to me, they represent Canada's first book, Canada's first attempt at literature.
That's great. I did not know that. One of the things that always interests me as a reader and also as an editor is the history of how an author came to write his novel. The first time you showed me the manuscripts were written in stone was, I think, 2008. It might have even been earlier. We met and discussed this book in the Le Gourmand Cafe on Spadina. And we discussed it thoroughly. And you took the manuscript back from me very thoughtfully and said, I'll get back to you on this. And I remember you walking away down Spadina, and in my memory, there's a gentle snow falling and you sort of disappear into the snow. And then it was 12 years later, almost, that you brought the manuscript back to me. And you said, you and Deborah are the only people who really believe in this book. Here it is. In between, we published your poetry. We published the Trillium nominated collection, nominated collection of short stories. What happened in that decade between your walking down the street, other than the short story, poetry, but what happened to you as a writer that allowed you to go back to that novel and finish it?
Mark, you're not going to like to hear this, and I don't think I've ever told you, but I, in fact, some years later offered it to Penguin, and they bought it immediately. They said, we want it. And I, and I thought about it sometime, and I recalled it. I said, no, it's not ready. I want it back. And if you recall, at some point I sent it to you, and you said, oh, great. And I said sometime later, no, it's not ready. I want it back. But I did never leave the manuscript. It's true I was publishing and writing and publishing other books, but I never left the manuscript. I was like Flaubert. I would put a word in the morning, and I would spend the afternoon taking it out. I would change the tense. I would change the point of view from first to third, and back again many times. But largely what happened was, it is a book about impending ruin, and in some ways the backdrop is one of viral and ecological catastrophe. And these catastrophes kept piling up, and I kept wanting to include them in the book. So as things got tougher and tougher, it began with SARS, and the book, the backdrop was then, and then there was various other ecological and viral problems, and I kept integrating them into the book. But I also realized the reason I withdrew the book twice was because I knew it wasn't, not only did I know it wasn't ready on an artistic level, but it wasn't ready historically, like the book hadn't aligned with its time yet. And when COVID came and I was working on these, I saw then that this book had reached its time, that it was, and I had some encouragement with you in that regard, and I appreciate that, that this book had reached its time and it was now ready to do. So I should also explain, I think you encountered the book in 2008, but I discovered this. I don't know if any of you out there recognize what that is. This is called a floppy disk. It's not all that floppy, but this is what I began this book on, because it says here, written in stone, December 28th, 1999. So that's some years ago. But it occurs to me that's an interesting, because this book is set in 1999. It's set, well, it appears to be, it's set right at that transition between the 20th and the 21st century. Thank you.
Hey. Paul Prescott is the hero or anti-hero of the book. And he spent his entire life trying to catalog and understand the petroglyphs, specifically on the northern shore of Lake Superior. You published a previous book, The Wolf's Head, Writing Lake Superior, which is a kind of biography tourist guide of Lake Superior. How much of Peter Unwin is in Paul Prescott?
Well, I think I share with Paul certain concerns around aging. I think I can share in particular his interest in the North, his desire to travel in the North, his interest in basically pressing himself against those rocks and getting into the North, the far North, the near North, his interest in camping, his interest in the canoe, his interest in exploring waterways. You know, strangely enough, Paul is loosely based on a character, a real historical character who occupies a minor position in sort of Canadian history. And his name is Selwyn Dewdney, who wrote a book in 1962 called, and it's really the only text on Canadian Aboriginal rock art, and I think it's called the Native Rock Art of the Canadian Shield. And it's a fairly simple book from 1962, sort of the work of an amateur anthropologist. And I think Paul is very much like that. And Paul stands in for the person who does that work. Paul is the one who does that work. And in the course of doing that work, he begins to realize that he's being affected by the land and by its indigenous history and by the mythologies, by the spirits, by whatever is inhabiting of that land. I've tried myself to leave myself open to that in my travels, and I guess we share that. But truthfully, I think I identify much more with his wife, Linda. I think that Linda played a greater role in creating me than Paul Prescott did. I tried to not write these characters so much as let them write themselves. I simply had to wait for them to evolve and say what they needed to say and do what they needed to do. I wanted to stay out of the book as much as possible, and perhaps that's one of the reasons the book took so long to finish.
Well, that actually gives rise not to the next question in my script. It gives rise to a question that's already come through the chat box, and people are encouraged to submit questions through the chat box. Somebody has asked, how has working on your PhD affected you as a novelist? Or has it at all?
Well, you know, this book was started long before I considered doing that, but it's affected me in this way. I really have to resist a desire to say nothing at all about this particular novel and just talk about the book, period. The book as a technology of, as I've suggested, of community. Like, these ideas are very important to me, especially now, and this venue sort of demonstrates it. This is a different type of community, very different from this, right? And there are implications around that. What those implications are, I'm not sure, but I do, at least on a scholarly basis or even a daily basis, try to explore. And I think this remarkable one of the reasons that I was willing to do this, because I wasn't originally, it just seemed too weird, is that it's historic. It's a moment in history, and it's also a moment where, you know, this machine, I'll just wobble it to show that I'm on a computer, and this machine, these two technologies are up against each other like this. I'm not going to say that they're in competition, or I'm not going to, they're there, and that's a new situation that we're facing. And I'm sure, Ben, that this is something that you face, Marc, as a publisher, you faced, I've faced, we face all the time. So it's difficult not for me to just want to jump off and go that way forever and express those interests. But in terms of the actual writing, you know, what I would say is that the academic writing postgraduate level is there's a lot of finishing. You have to finish things. You have to finish things all the time. And as a result, it's been very good for me in that I have published a lot of books while I was working on that PhD, just because those books were largely written, and I went, well, now finish. And so that was very successful for me. So in that way, that's a very direct link.
Okay, very good. Do you see a community forming around Written in Stone?
Well, I would like to see one. This is one, and I appreciate it. You know, it's an odd community because I can't see anybody, but I see here on my screen that there's 50 people attending, and I'm flattered. And like I say, it's a different form of community, yet it is affixed to the book. It is not the book, and it's not us sitting in a room, you know, with drinks in our hands. It's just our representations on the screen, so that it highlights again the role that the screen is increasingly playing in the creation of community, in a way that this technology once and still plays a role in the creation of community.
Very good. Well, okay, back to our regular script. One of the plots in the novel is about the falling apart of a marriage. Linda and Paul's marriage collapses. Both the husband and the wife are unfaithful, and they do attempt to reconcile by the end of the book. Not giving anything away. But the novel, in a way, is kind of a Dr. Zhivago-like device, because the personal echoes the larger societal reconciliation in a way. In Zhivago, Yuri Zhivago is torn between the peasant woman, essentially, and the high society woman. In the movie, it's Geraldine Chaplin and Julie Christie. And it sort of represents the two parts of Russia. And in the novel, in Written in Stone, it seems to me that Paul Prescott is torn between his wife and something that he doesn't understand, the woman he has an affair with. Does that kind of reflect the greater societal struggles that Paul is having?
Perhaps some. So some of the weather and the landscape is similar, for sure. I didn't write Dr. Zhivago, though. You know that, of course. But really, you know what? The novel that was foundational to me and that I've certainly read 13 or 14 times is Under the Volcano. And it even makes an appearance in this book. It was written by Malcolm Lowry, who finished it just down the street in Oakville, and finally finished it completely, I believe, at Niagara-on-the-Lake, even though it's set in Mexico. And it concerns a marriage that is coming apart, but it's set within a catastrophic global situation that the marriage can only echo. I think the marriage situation here is different because both of these people, in their strange way, they love each other. There's no insurmountable conflict between them. They've just, both in their various different ways, have been caught up in a sort of erotic force, which seems to run through the novel, and to me sort of runs through the Canadian Shield and through the rock and through the mountains and through the rivers and to the places. They just get caught up in it and they get swept away, and they pay a price, and Paul in particular pays an enormous price. But so I think I see the Dr. Zhivago link, but in terms of an honest debt that I owe, that Under the Volcano was an extremely influential book for me, and a careful reader will see lots of particular influence, literary and modernist influences that I borrowed and plagiarized from Malcolm Lowry.
You didn't plagiarize. And as T.S. Eliot said, the amateurs borrow, professionals steal. It's interesting you reference Under the Volcano. How old were you when you read it the first time?
You know, I tried a couple of times, and it's fairly dense, and I was in my 20s, early 20s, and I couldn't get through. But then I came to the remark of the letter, an extensive 10-page letter that he writes to his wife. And I see now in retrospection that there's a great deal of letter writing that goes on in my novel, particularly. And at that point I was absolutely hooked, and I just kept reading it and reading it. I should reach for it around here somewhere. I have a first edition.
Oh, wow.
But it lacks the cover, which changes it from being worth thousands of dollars to being worth, several hundred. It's an interesting book, and I'm going to just drop into, I'm not going to stay long in book history, but it's fascinating because it's printed on wartime paper, and you can recognize any book that was printed during the 40s because it's printed on rationed paper. It's very thin.
And it comes with a notice. This was printed with the permission of the US government or the Canadian government.
That's right.
Yes. Thank God we're not there right now. When did you write? Actually, this question has become redundant because you already answered it. I was going to ask you, when did you write the first draft of Written in Stone? But we now know it was 1999, which is interesting because in the draft I read in 2008, SARS really played a role in the novel, and plays less of a role. It's still there, it's still present, but it's less of a role. But we know there is some kind of pandemic. People are wearing masks. People are concerned for their health. So I won't go into all of that, but what inspired, was there an event, a specific event that inspired you to write the novel? or a series of events or questions that had been haunting you?
Um, I think it grew out of my travels around Lake Superior. I circled the entire lake several times on land, what's called a circle tour, and that's a unique landscape and a world unto itself. And I caught the bug, as people do, about Lake Superior. And I went again, and I went again. And somewhere it's sort of like Edgar Allan Poe and his short stories. You know, you start at the back, you start with the end of a vision that ends the story, and you move toward it. I had a vision in my mind of a man, a white man, who was injured and lying in the forests somewhere around the Coldwell Peninsula of Lake Superior. I closed my eyes and that's what I saw. He was wounded, perhaps fatally, I'm not sure, and he was lying in the bush. And I began to wonder how he got there. So that was just an image in my mind, and I was wondering how he got there. That's why Linda is so important to me. His wife is also wondering how he got there. And she retraces that journey many times. And I don't think she ever really finds out, but something's gone wrong. His desire to touch the indigenous has perhaps gone a little bit too far, who knows? But something's gone wrong. And I think the book is set on that border, on that seam. So that is loosely how it took place. I think without the, not that this is a spoiler alert type book. I mean, it's not that sort of book, but it's, I think I'll, stay there.
Okay. In many ways, the book is Paul's search, or Paul's journey, is to try and understand something that he actually knows he will never understand, but it's effort to understand it. And since the time that you began this book, the Canadian government has made a formal apology to the Indigenous peoples for the residential school system. We've had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And yet, the government still fails. It fails to ensure that there is adequate drinking water on all the reserves in the country. When you think about it, that's kind of crazy. The Europeans arrived here, and the Indigenous peoples, the 380 nations on this continent, the peoples of those nations welcomed us, the Europeans, and essentially said, come drink our fresh, clean water. And here we are, 400 years later, 500 years later, it's one of the things that our government is essentially denying them. In a way, when I read Written in Stone, it doesn't deal with those issues per se, but it kind of, in my reading, it points a way to a new or a better understanding or relationship with the Indigenous people. Was that in your mind as you were writing the book?
Well, not in a sense of, say, perhaps for me personally, because you know this as well as anyone, this book is not like a policy paper in any means. It's a work of creative work. But I just realized that I wanted that some people went to Paris, writers go to Paris, they go to New York. I was going to Canada. Canada was going to be the source of my inspiration. That was what I was going to mine. So I wanted to know the country that I lived in. And the minute you start to do that, you realize this is a native country. This is an indigenous country. Its reality is indigenous. Like there is a sprinkling of European sort of settler history, a few years of it, a few centuries of it, that's sprinkled on the top, but all of that vast bedrock of history is in a sense unknown to us. I'll say certainly unknown to me. And I just wanted to know it. To what extent? It's not the easiest thing to know. Because it's largely called pre-literate. I think I would argue that these rock paintings and even petroglyphs, which are carvings in rocks, petroforms, which are rock shapes lay on the land, which cover this country, are a form of literature, are a form of writing, and in a sense, a book. You could go beyond that to wampum, which is definitely a form of literature, even to the point of, almost typographical codes written in shells. So that to me was a sense of wanting to know that, wanting to learn that. And that was really important for me because it represented a reversal. You know, Canadian history has always taught to me, and I had experiences as a series of impositions that were imposed on the Native people and their erasure and disappearance. And that's okay, that's certainly, but I also, that is certainly what has happened, and you've alluded to that. But there's another, that you could consider other things that instead of erasure and defeat, you saw adaptability. You saw adaptability in technologies. And that it brought up, and I think this book very much concerns that, is appropriation. And it explores what must we appropriate from that past in order to survive? What must we appropriate from that past in order to exist in this country? To exist as thinking, as somewhat enlightened people about our own country. What do we need to take from it? And what shouldn't we take? And what, that is to say, when have we taken it too far? And I think Paul Prescott indicates a person who's a good and a moral man, but and he wants to learn this and he wants to know it, but his intensity and his desire to know it, I think, somewhat overcome him, and he might make some sort of mistakes, and he pays for it enormously. And it strikes me that that in that way he appears as some sort of sacrificial figure. This has only come to me afterwards, because like I said, I didn't want to create these characters. I wanted to create themselves. And he's a sacrificial character, but he's also a good man. And it occurs to me that if you're an evil person and you get sacrificed, well, it doesn't quite have the same meaning. There's a certain tragedy in his death because he's well-intentioned. But I think he makes a classic mistake in believing that his interpretations of these Aboriginal shapes and literacies, that he can interpret them, that he can fathom them. And that may be a sort of a hubris and a mistake that he makes, and that he can actually use these native rock paintings to foresee a prophecy and foresee its conclusion, and perhaps even rid the world of the catastrophes that are taking place. And I think that's what he consciously or unconsciously sets out to do. And I think that's just too much. And he pays for that.
Yeah, it's he certainly does. Although when he dies, nobody throws a dead dog after him. For those of you who have not read Under the Volcano, that is how the hero of Under the Volcano dies. He's thrown over a cliff, and they throw a dead dog after him. All right. We have a couple of questions come in. So I'm going to, a little bit early, turn to those. And I will start with this one, which is kind of fun. Hello from Edmonton, Peter. In our last whiskey-laced conversation, you told me you weren't a writer. Here you are with yet another book. What did you mean by that statement? Curious minds long to know. And this is from Gail in Edmonton.
Well, that's a devious question. You know, they drink a lot in Edmonton. Boy, do they drink in Edmonton. And they handle their liquor extremely well. Unlike myself, so I have no memory of this, so I don't know what I was saying. I think I don't identify as such. I mean, I realize I'm a career writer and I've written all sorts of books and will continue to, but I don't identify as such. I was thinking of the British playwright Joe Orton. You know, you must know Joe Orton, Marc.
Yes.
Wrote What the Butler Saw, a great playwright, died way too young. He never identified as an author. He would never tell people that he was a writer. My unfortunate part is I don't have anything else to say. I don't know what to, if I don't say that, I don't know what to say. So I don't identify with a scene or a establishment or something. In fact, I'm a little uncomfortable with all of that. So I think that's probably what I was trying to allude to.
Writers write, and you write, so you are a writer. Fair to say?
Right or wrong?
All right.
Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged.
Guilty as charged. And there are a couple of other questions here. One, which is kind of interesting. It says, I'm going to presume it's for you because you're the only one with a painting that's clear enough to see. The question for when the time is right. Who is responsible for the painting behind you? Are you a painter as well?
You know, I used to paint. A friend of mine called it Group of Eight, as you can see. So I used to paint, I used to love color, and this is actually a freighter canoe heading up the Moose River out of Moosonee up toward James Bay. And I took a photograph of it and I painted it from a photograph. But I used to paint and I used to love it. It's largely an outdoor activity. But I realized I was simply painting because I wasn't really getting my work published at the time. There's so many gatekeepers involved. There's all people who will say no. No, we're not going to publish that. So what do you do? And I got fed up with that. And so I started to paint because there are no gatekeepers. No one comes and says, no, you can't paint. You know you can't hang that up on your wall. So I took a great pleasure of it. And then I started, suddenly things started to get published on a regular basis. So I gave up painting. I have not painted in years, but I like this one. And all of my painting sort of has that Group of Eight feel about them.
Very much the Northern Ontario feel to them.
Also very much an opportunity to get outside, out north, out into the north. I was thinking it's like hunting without a gun. I've always thought I might like hunting because of the focus and getting out, but the notion of finally bringing down an animal was probably too much. And this, you don't have to do that. And extraordinary, I would take an easel. I was an easel painter. I'd take them into the woods and extraordinary things would happen. I would see extraordinary things. I once had a pine marten simply crawl up between my legs. I was standing still, had no idea I was there. And I looked down and there was a pine marten. And seeing a pine marten is a rare thing. They're an elusive animal. And it was actually between my legs. So things like that did happen while I was painting.
Wonderful. Matthew Harvey says he hasn't yet read the book, but he's getting a sense that maybe there's a bit of Conrad's Mr. Kurtz in the character of Paul. How do you feel about that?
Heart of Darkness is another book that I've probably read 10 or 50. I probably read it once a year. I have a few books like that. The Great Gatsby falls in there as well. And along with, there's certainly a Mr. Kurtz quality. And if I recall, I recently edited a line where Paul in a drunken stupor says something like, Mr. Kurtz, he's dead. And I edited that line out because it wasn't necessary. And so yes, there is that sense of a journey into the unknown with extreme consequences and into cultures and mysteries that are not known to the person who's undertaking them.
And of course, Kurtz is the agent for the Belgian government in the Belgian Congo, where, for those of you who don't know, if, I forget the exact number, but it was if X number of pounds of gold weren't extracted every day, people's hands were chopped off.
Yes, a terrible catastrophe, tragedy of the worst order, different.
Yes.
Millions,
Totally.
10 million people. You know, Deborah just sort of indicated, you have to talk about Linda. I did want to say largely, this is largely, I don't know if I call it a woman's book, but a book by a woman. It is largely told by her, in her voice.
Yes, it is.
And her...
It starts and ends with her as the narrator.
Yes, she definitely carries the load in this book, which is perhaps a cultural admission as well. But anyways, I just wanted to say that because, you know, there's an sense of masculinizing the events, and in a masculine environment, or that's coded that way, she plays a preeminent role as trying to fathom what's going on, and very much a receptor to what's going on. And she wonders a great deal about who she is. Where does she belong? Is she of the people? You know, there's so many native words that when you translate them mean, whether it be Cree or Innu or they mean the people. We are of the people. And she's always, she can't say that of herself. She's who people, what people, who are my people? You know, she's some Scottish descent, Canadian white woman. She's searching in a way that Paul is too.
Right. Only her search is rooted in contemporary Eurocentric society, perhaps.
I think so. And she gets almost against her will, or she's willing enough, just through the coincidence of who she marries. She gets drawn into the north. Really, she's a southern girl. She knows how to, as she say, I think she says, separate her recyclables. You know, that's, but she doesn't know how to. You know, so her first experience with the north is a 40-day canoe trip.
That was their honeymoon, I think, wasn't it?
Honeymoon or wedding
Yes.
voyage, as Paul.
The wedding voyage, yes.
As it used to be called.
How did it feel writing from a woman's point of view?
I had no choice. Like I said, I didn't really, it had nothing to do with me. I just had to listen carefully to try and think of to try and listen and to write what she said. And I also think it probably allowed me to unstick myself from certain things, you know, and be more independent. I find her a remarkable character, actually. I find her a remarkable voice anyways. And as I said, you asked me about Paul and her, I identify more with her. Although I know in sort of trying to describe this book, it's very hard to sort of get around this whole sort of masculinist image of the man traveling explorer, you know, pitting himself against the land and stuff. But I think the tension and her role in it is so significant that it teeters back and forth between the two of them.
Yes, it does. She plays a remarkable role in the book.
And she's very much loved. I think she's uncertain of her own love towards her husband, to a certain degree anyways. I think she finally comes to terms with it, or to see it, but especially when he's gone. But she is very much the recipient of his love.
Yes, very much. It is. Well, we answered one of the questions well enough that one of the person who asked it, Matthew, has said, Mr. Mcnally, how can I order the book from you? So I don't know if Ben's tuned in and can speak or not, but perhaps he can unmute himself at this point, and we can bring this evening to a gentle close. And I think we're going to run a card for all the people who want to be able to order the book that tells them how to order, but Ben can also explain that now if you'd like.
With pleasure. But first of all, let me say thank you to Marc and to Peter, and for that tech expertise from Chantal Cho and from Sarah Cooper. Oh, look at that. It just pops up. You can order the book from us. The telephone number is there. It's also on the website, benmcnallybooks.com. And if you don't have a pencil to write down info@benmcnallybooks.com or the telephone number is on our website. And through the website, you can just go to Ask Ben and ask me for a copy of the book. I look forward to hearing from you all. Thanks, gentlemen, for a very lively and interesting conversation. And thank you very much, audience, for your attention and your participation. Great work, guys. Really, it's not an easy thing to do, and I think you did a terrific job, all of you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to close by once again thanking all of the people who showed and contributed to this transitory and sort of interesting community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is always a difficult time where we have to sign off now, right?
Yes. We say thank you very much, everyone, and good night.
Good night, John boy.